In this video, I'm going to show you how you can build a $39 Xyris the Writhing Storm commander deck. Let's get started. Quick disclaimer, the total cost of this deck was just under $39 as of the day of recording. Prices were checked using mtgstocks.com. However, the total cost is excluding the cost of the commander as well as the basic lands in the deck. The deck is 1DH legal, meaning all the cards in the deck are $1 or under. Xyris is a 5-cost 3/5 flyer that reads, whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, create a 1/1 snake creature token. Whenever Xyris the Writhing Storm deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each draw that many cards. So, the goal of our deck is to get our opponents to draw a bunch of cards, creating a bunch of snake tokens for us, and then either winning through combat damage with our snakes, we'll pump them up, make them big, swing in for lethal, or get incidental damage either off of our snakes entering or leaving the battlefield, or off of us drawing or discarding cards. So, let's get into the deck. We are going to start out by talking about Accelerants. We are running 13, which is on the higher end, but helps us to get into our game plan a little bit faster. Accelerants we have are Diligent Farmhand, Dawn Treader Elk, Embodiment of Spring. All three of these we can sacrifice to cheat extra lands onto the battlefield early. We also have Secura Tribe Elder and Colony Heart Expedition, which are more cards that you sacrifice to get extra lands onto the battlefield early. Wood Elves gives us a forest when it enters. Search for Tomorrow, Rampant Growth, and Cultivate are classic sorcery speed spells that help us get extra lands to the battlefield early. I especially like Search for Tomorrow because you can suspend it on turn 1, which always feels good. We also have Skyshroud Claim, which gets us 2 forests, and Circuitous Route, which can get us 2 lands out of our deck. Usually we're going to try to get gates, however you can get basics as well. We are running all 3 of the possible gates for this deck. We have 1 mana rock in the Talisman of Curiosity, and then Farseek, which can get us a mountain or island. I did want to note that we are running Mystic Sanctuary, so once you get your land base sorted out, you're going to want to start pulling islands out of the deck so that when you do pull Mystic Sanctuary and play it, you're able to put it in play untapped, allowing you to put an instant or sorcery back on top of your library. Next up, we're going to talk about the game plan. We have 17 cards specific to our game plan. As I said, we want to get as many triggers off of Xyris as we can. Nadir Kraken is kind of a backup, pseudo, much worse version of Xyris because it allows us to get tentacles out. Anytime we draw a card, we get to pay 1, we can get a tentacle out, and we can get a +1/+1 counter on our Kraken. This is going to slowly get bigger over time and allow us to swing in for a lot of damage, and those tentacles kind of can fake being snakes. Not as good as having Xyris out, but if Xyris gets removed too many times, we can't pay the cost to bring it back, or we can just double up on everything if we get the Kraken out. Feels good. Lore Scale Codal is just going to get huge as we're playing wheel effects that make us discard our hand and draw 7 cards, or lots of other permanents that help us continually draw cards. It's just going to get bigger and bigger over time. Impact Tremors, Outpost Siege, and Warstorm Surge all help us to deal damage to our opponents. Impact Tremors deals 1 to each opponent whenever a creature enters our battlefield. So if you wheel, there's 21 damage to each opponent, assuming you have 3 opponents and they're all discarding and drawing 7 cards, then you're getting 21 snakes. Outpost Siege, we're normally going to choose dragons to deal 1 damage to target creature or player, but you can choose cons if you're behind and really need some card draw or pseudo card draw. And then Warstorm Surge is the same essentially as Outpost Siege, except for reverse. When creatures enter, you can deal damage to any target. These you can use for targeted removal, because when your stuff is leaving, you don't have to target a player. Mostly we're going to be targeting players though, but if there are problematic creatures or even planeswalkers out, we can point some damage at them. Glinthorn Buccaneer is similar, except for he's dealing damage to each opponent on discard. And cards like Rogue's Passage and Skarg the Rage Pits help us to get in with evasion, either through unblockable or giving our creature trample. Xyris is one of the most important creatures that we want to be able to get this on, because when he deals damage, We're going to draw some cards, and we're also going to get some snakes. You can use it on Glinthorn Buccaneer just so that you can activate his ability, allowing you to draw cards and discard cards, dealing extra damage to opponents. We also have a Dragon Mage, which you'll see later, which you also want to be able to get in for combat damage on your opponents. Ogre Battle Driver, Fires of Yavimaya, and Tamir Ascendancy are great because they give our snakes haste, especially the Ogre Battle Driver because he turns our 1/1s into 3/1s. If you have 21 3/1s on the battlefield, you're going to swing in for a lot of damage. Fires of Yavimaya, you can also sack for a combat boost, +2/+2. And then we have the second ability on Tamir Ascendancy, which gives us a draw when we play a creature with power 4 or greater. However, we only have a couple of those, so we're not going to be triggering that much. We just mostly have it for that haste. Aqueous Form also gives us evasion in that it makes enchanted creature unblockable. Also gives us a scry, which helps us smooth out our draws. Tetsuko Umezawa's Fugitive gives all of our snakes unblockable because creatures with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. And then the Horizon Chimera gives us a bunch of life gain whenever we draw cards. So if we wheel once, we draw 7 cards. Horizon Chimera is going to gain us 7 life as well. Also is a nice flyer, so we can block or attack with it. Here are those cards that are going to pump up our snakes. We have Overrun, Vitalizing Wind, and Return of the Wild Speaker. Trample is always nice as it makes blocking a lot harder. And then Vitalizing Wind and Return of the Wild Speaker are instant speed, so we can wait until after our opponents declare blocks and then pump up our team. Vitalizing Wind is a good feel because nobody knows this card. Not very many people have seen this card, so when you play it, it's a big surprise to people, and that's always fun. Return of the Wild Speaker gives us a little extra utility in that we can use it to draw cards. But with the Wheel of Type effects, you're probably not going to be choosing that too often in this deck. Lastly, for our game plan, we have Mirror Shield, which helps protect us, giving the equipped creature hexproof. It also helps us to deal with the Death Touch type creatures that are out there, or just those red style board wipes that deal a certain amount of damage, gives us a little extra toughness, and hopefully we can avoid those or force our opponent to spend a little extra mana to get rid of our most necessary creatures. For interference, we have 14 cards. That's pretty good, especially since some of our other cards like Warstorm Surge, Outpost Siege can help us to interfere with our opponent's game plan. This is a solid base, and we're going to start out by talking about Incendiary Command, which has multiple modes. One is to deal 4 damage to a player, another is to do 2 damage to each creature, a third is to destroy target non-basic land, and then the fourth is that each player discards all cards in their hand and then draws that many. When I have played Incendiary Command in playtesting, I usually end up using the Destroy Non-Basic Land and Windfall ability, or just deal 4 damage to a player and Windfall. So I put it there in that it's going to help us get rid of a land that might be problematic. Acidic Slime can do that as well, as get rid of artifacts or enchantments, and then Reclamation Sage, which helps us get rid of artifacts and enchantments. We have Reality Shift, which can exile any creature. Ironcrag Pyromancer, which can turn over turn, help us get rid of those small utility type creatures dealing 3 damage to any target, but also can help us just do damage to the face. Collective Defiance is another one of those multi-mode cards. I'm usually paying for all the modes, but depending on the turn, where we're at, I may choose just one. It allows us to Windfall a player, deal 4 damage to a creature, or 3 damage to a player. You kind of just have to choose for in that moment what is best for your game plan. Incubation and Incongruity. We have this as a more expensive Pongify or Rapid Hybridization. When you're balling on a budget, that's what you gotta go with. We also have Struggle, which deals damage to a creature equal to the number of lands you control. I hardly ever see this card, if at all. It fits in nicely within this deck because it also has Survive attached to it, meaning we can play it from our graveyard and then exile it, which makes each player shuffle his or her graveyard into his or her library. If we're getting kind of low with all of our wheel type effects, we can use this from our graveyard to shuffle all the things back in, or if there's a particular card in our graveyard that we can't get back, we can shuffle it back in and hopefully draw it on a future turn. Arcane Denial and Dream Fracture, both counter spells of our opponents, and allow us to draw as well as force our opponents to draw, giving us more snakes. And then Narset, Partner of Veils, is especially mean in this deck because you can play this and then cast a wheel effect, forcing all of your opponents to discard their hand and then preventing them to draw more cards. It seems a little bit counterproductive, but a lot of times you're going to be using this to your own advantage. You can also just minus her to get her off the battlefield if you need to. She can also provide you a little bit of card draw by letting you look at the top 4 and putting a non-creature, non-land from among them into your hand. So she provides a lot of utility and also denies our opponent's resources, which is a good feeling. Whelming Wave is a type of board wipe that is going to return all creatures to their owner's hands unless they're krakens, leviathans, octopuses, or serpents. We do have the Nadir Kraken as well as Xyris, who is a leviathan itself, so you're going to protect yourself a little bit while wiping everybody else's board, potentially. We also have Commit, which puts any non-land permanent second from the top on somebody's library. And more so, we have it in our deck for Memory, which gives us a wheel type effect. Each player is going to shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library and then draw 7 cards. So it gives us the interference as well as consistency that we like. Lastly, for interference, we have Aether Gale. This was one of those effects I was looking for, kind of a big removal card. And this can get 6 non-land permanents to their owner's hands. However, some other cards that I considered but didn't ultimately put in the deck were Chain Reaction, Baral's Expertise, and Flood of Tears. You may want to swap one of these out. In playtesting, I like Aether Gale most, but this was the toughest choice for me in creating this deck. Next up, we're going to talk about the cards that provide consistency in this deck. We have 15 of them. That's a little bit on the lower end for my play group. However, since a lot of them are wheel effects, we're expecting to get a little bit bigger of an effect out of those cards. Some of the less big effects we have are Frantic Search, which is basically a free card in any blue deck. Shielding Plaques, which allows us to draw a card when it enters and gives a creature hexproof, and then Brainstorm. We also have the Lore Broker, which helps us get those draw and discard triggers. We can get those on other players' turns as well, which is nice. Coiling Oracle and Growth Spiral, which draw us cards, or best case scenario, help us put extra land onto the battlefield. Niv Mizzet the Firemind does double duty here in that it helps us to draw cards, but also whenever we are drawing a card, we get to deal damage to a creature or player, so it can help us get rid of those small creatures or just deal damage to opponents. Or if we get a big windfall effect, we can usually get rid of the bigger creatures that are on the table. Fevered Visions and Dictate of Krufix allow us to draw cards turn over turn and also force our opponents to draw cards, which in turn gives us more snakes. We're going to get the first trigger on both of these, assuming we play Dictate of Krufix at the end step of the opponent before us. And Fevered Visions is just going to help us get in a little extra damage on our opponents as long as they have 4 or more cards in their hand at the beginning of their end step. Regrowth and Skullwinder help us to get cards back from our graveyard. With all of the discarding we're going to be doing, we're eventually going to have to throw something away that we don't want to, so these can help us get those back. Skullwinder is exceptionally fun because you're going to get that card back, and then hopefully you're casting a windfall ability, forcing the player who also got a card back to discard that card. So just make sure you select the player that doesn't have mana open and isn't playing blue that could counter you. Nin the Pain Artist provides us consistency in that we can use it on an opponent's creature to force them to draw a bunch of cards, giving us a bunch of snakes. We can use it on ourselves to draw a bunch of cards, just kill off a snake but do a bunch of damage to it, and also get some draw triggers. Or we can just get rid of small utility creatures of our opponents. It does allow them to draw 1 or 2 cards or whatever you're deciding, so you kind of have to just decide what's worth it for you. But this is a great card in this deck. Just provides us a lot of utility in a lot of different directions. Korvath's Fury gives us the utility to deal damage to people or force them to draw cards and discard cards. Dragon Mage is that card I was telling you about earlier that we want to get in for combat damage, because when he deals combat damage to a player, each player is going to discard their hand and then draw 7 cards. With Xyris out, that's going to give us 21 snakes, assuming we have 3 opponents still. And then Prosperity, we can just dump a ton of mana into making each player draw a bunch of cards. Next up, we're going to talk about the lands. We are running 41 in this deck. Gaia Reach Sanitarium, just like the Lore Broker, is going to help us get those draw and discard triggers. Mosswort Bridge gives us a pseudo draw through Hideaway, and then Halimar Depths is going to help us to smooth out our draws. We have the Mystic Sanctuary, which can put an instant or sorcery back on top of our library. Rogue's Passage, which makes something unblockable. Skarg the Rage Pits, which gives something +1/+1 and Trample. We have 4 fetches in this deck, Myriad Landscape and Blighted Woodland, which help to ramp us a little bit, and then Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, which both get any basic we need. Gruul Guildgate, Gruul Turf, Kazandu Refuge, Rugged Highlands, Temple of Abandon, and Timber Gorge all give us red-green. Command Tower and Frontier Bivouac give us all 3 of our colors. Thornwood Falls, Simic Growth Chamber, Simic Guildgate, and Lumbering Falls all give us green-blue. Izzet Boilerworks and Izzet Guildgate give us blue-red. For basics, we are running 7 forests, 6 islands, and 4 mountains. The average CMC of this deck was 3.18, so on the lower end, as you can see, lots of 2 and 3 drops on that mana curve, which is nice because you're usually going to be having things to do. Here, I have included a few budget-friendly upgrades I would consider if I were to go above that $1 price point. If you want to see the deck list, as well as some other suggestions I would consider, check out the link in the description. Or, better yet, share down in the comments how you would upgrade this deck. That way, others can see your brilliant ideas and alter to their liking. If you liked the video, you should give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you do, make sure you ring the bell so you don't miss any of the new weekly content from Budget Commander. Otherwise, you can check out the video in the top right or either of the playlists on the bottom.